going to call the Ordinance Committee meeting of May 13th, 2025 to order, and can we have a roll call?
We have Committee Member Gutierrez, who's not here, Committee Member Jordan.
Here.
And Chair Snedden.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have any public comment for items not on the agenda?
We do. We have one public comment, Elizabeth Sorgman.
I'm sorry, it's for the sign.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So seeing none for items not on the agenda, if we could move forward with the agenda.
Thank you. Today we'll be discussing amending Chapter 22.70 of the Municipal Code regarding sign regulations.
Thank you. That will have staff presentation.
Thank you, committee members. Assistant City Attorney John Doimus here to present. I also want to give a thanks to Assistant City Administrator Renee Irely, who helped with a lot of outreach. And so we're here to talk about the sign ordinance, and I want to give a recap of where we were last time and where we're specifically going to focus today our conversation on the presentation. So back in October, we brought forth amendments to the sign ordinance, and the committee accepted a lot of the changes, but one particular issue is the committee wanted us to conduct outreach on the allowance of temporary signs in the public right-of-way. Currently, we allow real estate open house signs in the public right-of-way to the exclusion of all others. So the committee wanted to look at some allowance, but still protecting public safety, public access, and recognition of surrounding aesthetics. So that was the focus of coming back here today. But before we get into that one issue, I just wanted to provide a brief recap of why the changes, some of the major changes, and then delve into the final issue on temporary signs in the public right-of-way. So first, the major intents of the amendments to this ordinance were to have a constitutionally sound ordinance. We didn't get into aesthetic provisions really much or anything else into those details. It was having a well-rounded ordinance to pass constitutional muster. A lot of the ordinance has been outdated due to recent case law over the last decade. We want to also kind of amend or eliminate some of outdated provisions we have in the ordinance, and also kind of edit some unclear language in regards to that, and definitions especially. So, as I mentioned, a major push of why we needed to make amendments in the last few years was due to case law. We've also have been receiving, over the years, complaints over signs in the public right-of-way. Right now, we don't allow A-frame signs or temporary signs in the public right-of-way, minus the real estate signs, as I mentioned. But over the last few years, especially after COVID, there's been a great proliferation of these types of signs. We kind of appointed a sign subcommittee back in 2018, 2019, kind of to look at updating the ordinance, but when COVID hit, that kind of just organically dissolved. So kind of was left not being handled, and so the city attorney's office decided to raise the issue again and make these amendments from a legal perspective, as I mentioned, due to the outdated ordinance. And so many of the amendments were focused on a case from the U.S. Supreme Court back in 2014, Reed versus Town of Gilbert. And the court found that the town, the village there, violated the First Amendment because they regulated temporary signs based on content. And so when you're looking at the ordinance and you have any provisions in there where to determine compliance or what's either allowed or not allowed based on what's said in the sign, or the purpose of the sign, that's when you have a First Amendment issue. So that was the goal of kind of going through the ordinance and eliminating any of that content-based language throughout the ordinance. So what does it mean for us? We can regulate signs based on zoning districts. You can have particular rules as long as it's content neutral for one district versus another. You can regulate the time of signs being placed or the manner, but you really can't focus on the messaging. There's one exception, which I'll get into in 1 second. But if you are to do it, it must be narrowly tailored, and there must be a very strong, compelling government interest to do so. So with what were some of the main changes we did? We added definitions such as commercial speech or non-commercial speech. We created a kind of a catch-all provision, creating an exemption for non-commercial signs, basically in terms of making allowance of a content neutral provision that allows people to place signs either on their residence or commercial area, but having specific size restrictions, so they're not, very large or distracting in size. And that catch-all is there to kind of equal the playing field, like not worrying it so much about content base when someone could have a sign either for their residence or their commercial property. And so one of these things is you see exemptions of large grand opening signs for banners, right? Well, it's content-based, because if you're opening or closing out, you can put such a banner. Well, why couldn't you put a banner year-round, right, for other occasions? So the idea is not to have a proliferation of these large banners, but allowing a content base with size dimensions, signs for businesses that they can place there that are exempt. So they're much smaller in nature and different versus your large business size you have in the facade or everything else like that. Another thing we made on content base is anything that contains obscene matters, that we use the definition of the California Penal Code, or anything that incites violence or promotes other illegal activity, right? So if you're inciting a call to violence, or if it's defined as obscene, that's prohibited. Hate speech, though, it's different. That's protected. An example is an old case. It was based off a movie in 1980 out of the village of Skokie from Illinois, where you had a Nazi parade in terms of the middle of town with the insignia. And the court ruled that as long as they're not inciting violence, and they're just, walking there silently with, unfortunately, swastikas, that's hate speech protected. We also, one of the major changes put in there is that if you have an approved sign based on size, aesthetics, from the sign community, and all they're doing is changing the messaging and not changing the aesthetics or the dimensions or the lighting, then that does not need a further review or permit, because there's no need to review the content based of that sign. So as I mentioned, some of the changes overall is to eliminate anything content related in the ordinance. We had new definitions. We updated non-conforming signs and antiquated code enforcement process to it. We allowed, based on case law, for any enforcement appeals on fines to be heard by the sign committee. And we also allowed a clear process for unabandoned, unsafe signs on city property to allow for immediate removal. We don't have to wait for it. We just remove the sign and we hold them for 90 days for safekeeping, and then we discard them after those 90 days if nobody claimed the signs. Now to the main point where we continue the item to be heard today. So as I mentioned, the committee was really interested in looking at allowing some form of temporary signs in the public right-of-way for the city. And so we did some outreach. Ms. Irely was very keen scheduling this. Originally, when we first made some amendments, we went to the sign committee. But after, in the last few months, we met with the Access Advisory Committee regarding the outreach of public signs, temporary private signs in the public right-of-way, met with downtown Santa Barbara and the Santa Barbara Realtors Association. And so this is the byproduct and the proposal today, the major change from last time we met regarding the sign ordinance. And so it's found on page 22 at the bottom. It starts in the ordinance, and the section is 2270.030B26. So this will allow temporary private off-site signs to be placed in the right-of-way so long as they meet the following criteria, and I'll go in detail in terms of the criteria. So they must be placed in the parkway area of the right-of-way. There's a definition we reference to in the code, and that's usually you're not on the sidewalk or not where people are trying to use as access points, but just kind of a grassy area within the right-of-way. They may only be placed during a 42-hour period on the weekend, so starting at 6 a.m. Saturday morning, it must be removed by 11:59 p.m. on Sunday. And then we do have a size requirement. They can't be higher than 42 inches above the ground and must not have a greater area than 6 feet, each individual sign. They must be freestanding and not attached to an item like a utility pole or, like I said, mentioned block of travel. And then what is important for enforcement purposes is if anyone's violating any of these provisions, city staff can immediately remove and store the signs for 90 days. And then finally, staff, talking internally with downtown parking and other departments that kind of are relevant to this discussion, we decided to have a complete prohibition of any private signs in the right-of-way, so not even the 42-hour period allowed on the weekends in other areas of the city in the El Pueblo Viejo Landmark District. And the reason we did that is strictly from a health and safety basis. There's really a lack of, if you look at it, that district, a lack of parkway space, number one. Number two is that's where you have the highest pedestrian traffic, foot traffic in there. And so that can cause access issues, especially for the disabled community as well. So that is staff's recommendation, to have no allowance of signs in the public right-of-way regarding that district. But everywhere else in the city would be allowance of having 42 hours with the size restrictions, making sure it's placed in the parkway areas. And with that major change, I'm open and available for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Doimus. Do we have questions from Councilmember Jordan?
Thank you. Okay, better help me with the definition of parkway. It wasn't in the definition section, so it's buried in the other 50 pages somewhere.
Yes, let me pull that out. Give me 1 second. So the definition is found in, and I'll actually read the definition in a second. So parkway is defined in 10.04.070 of the municipal code, and then let me get that code section for a second.
Oh, that's why.
It's too good of a question when you have me looking like
It's
this.
not, it's not in this ordinance, it's in the muni code.
It's referenced everywhere else.
Okay,
so,
sorry.
No, it's okay. I have them right there on the verge of bringing it up. So parkway is defined simply as a portion of a street other than a roadway or a sidewalk. So when you're looking at that kind of grass area, that's kind of like, where trees are and all that. It's not technically on the sidewalk, it's not in the street, so hence the parkway.
So there's a ton of intersections around town where we have and continue to do work on carving out ADA access. And what we end up with, where there might have been a parkway before, you got these islands with these cutouts next to them, and the island is holding up a light pole or a signal pole. And all the parkway has disappeared that was adjacent to that too. It's now just one big hunk of sidewalk.
Yes.
So I'll give you an example. Every corner, particularly the corner in front of Taco Bell at Meg's and Cliff Drive, there's no parkway there anymore. I think Caddy Corner also in front of Corner Tap, also same kind of thing. You just have these like concrete pedestals surrounded by the ramps and surrounded by concrete, where there probably used to be some dirt or something there. And so you typically see sandwich board signs from commercial endeavors either leaning up against the light posts or somewhere in that area that would be, if you were looking at it historically, not your 6-foot parkway, but a concrete extension of that sidewalk that now makes the entire thing into a sidewalk. And this happens all over, because you see them on the major corners where people are trying to direct somebody either to a Wednesday or Thursday drive-through or open houses on the weekend, right? So how will those be handled?
Chair Stein and Councilmember Jordan, you answered that question, because what originally was made a parkway, you said now all of a sudden it's transformed as part of the sidewalk. So that's an elimination of a parkway space. So that would not be an intended area for be able to place a sign there.
Even if clearly somebody couldn't walk where that is, like if there's some of those signal poles are a foot diameter, and they're on a steel-based pedestal, and you're not going from A to B through the pole.
Sure.
Right.
If there's like a little bit of an area, so it's not just based on like, parkway could be cement, so it doesn't have to be defined as something has grass, right? So if there's an area where it's not a pathway as considered part of the sidewalk or has not become of it, and as long as it's not attached to a utility pole and there's this little space remaining, that is a possibility. Staff will look at that and not include that.
I don't imagine we're going to have Parkway Police, but I think there's a zillion of these little one-offs all over town.
Sure.
And every time we continue with these capital projects, we're making a zillion more. Does the right-of-way include State Street proper in the street? Or do we have other applicable ordinances that would stop somebody from either hopefully permanently putting a sandwich board out in the middle of the street, or what would be if you had an event, farmer's market? They're permitted, but do they have a sign permit to put their signs out at each end of, at the four corners of farmer's market that walk your bike, no dogs, those kind of signs too?
So Councilmember Jordan, currently the law as it exists right now, those A-frames or all those signs are not allowed. So as of right now, they shouldn't be up there. So when we're talking about legal signs or these downtown signs, this ordinance amendments are actually not taking away any rights that were previously established. Though they are not permitted to be there right now. What this ordinance does is it takes what was a single content-based allowance of real estate signs and now allows generally non-content-based to be placed in the right-of-way for a specific period of time of only 42 hours in specific areas of Parkway where we're clear. And what also this ordinance does is now have language in there that allows staff to say, because it's in the ordinance, and people now, they're responsible for what's in the ordinance, the law. You can't claim ignorance of the laws. If they put it in violation there, all staff has to do is just pick them up, take them, and just store them for 90 days and then discard.
So you see the tension there, though, because somewhere you have a throw-off line on health and human safety and blah, blah, blah. Well, those signs are exactly about health and human safety and blah, 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 right? They're an alert, they're at the borders of farmer's market telling you, you can't ride a bike, you can't bring a dog in.
Sure. Now, those are different. So now government speech is different. It doesn't fall under the same scrutiny. So if it's the city placing signs, a public agency
I
like
don't
having
think the
signs.
city's placing those
So,
signs.
so even then, even though if they're putting those signs about, they're not allowed. So what would have to happen to be consistent for the ordinance is a conversation between farmers market and maybe working with the city to place some safety signs temporarily. That would be the
Okay.
appropriate solution for that issue.
And then, I don't really know what I'm talking about, so give me a little latitude here. I'm pretty sure that whatever downtown organization is before, I'm pretty sure that they have handled soft land use permitting in the downtown corridor for events before, that they kind of had a blanket process where somebody came to them and registered for use of the sidewalk, a street, or an event out there, and they were actually able to handle the entire thing in their office, I think. So any thought to the farmers markets of the world or line dancing on Wednesday night with signs up on each side, warning that it's pedestrian zone, that type of thing, on the new organization being able to continue some type of, immediate walk into the office, meet the criteria, you're approved, and you can have your event. You can do that on Monday and have your event on a Wednesday evening out in the street, that type of thing. Any process that could be looked at that would allow them to take the city out of it so that it would be done over the counter and facilitate getting those type of signage up.
So that was that's a really good question. That was a problem why, the answer is no, but let me explain why. That was the issue in terms of, because you're still looking at content base and allowing some exceptions. And so that's where we got really creative in meeting with different groups and what is a sign that, what is a basis that allow protection of the public, some ability to communicate in the public right away of private signs to do so. And so this 42-hour portion is what we recommend. And we won't recommend in the EPB district is because of the issue of, from a safety standpoint, of the lack of parkway space and the high pedestrian traffic, as I mentioned. And to allow a certain mechanism of permitting just creates a constitutional mess and a logistic mess. So it's either, so to us, it's like right now, there's no allowance of any of these signs right now. So, originally was when we came back in October, it was just and the safest thing was an all or nothing proposition. And committee's like, well, no, we want at least some allowance. And so we definitely got creative, and we feel very comfortable that this ordinance today brought before you can pass constitutional muster because it creates only restrictions based on size, placement, doesn't dust content at all, has a limitation in time, and then prevents it in one zone, and then we give justification of why we preventing it in one zone. So to do what you're asking kind of puts us back in this really murky area. That's why I would not recommend it.
So paint for me the picture of how the process would work for an activation event on State Street or a farmer's market or what else have we done? Adoptive dog event in front of Satellite where they want to use a portion of the street. And obviously the street has to become pedestrian only.
Sure.
And so it needs signage at each end notifying people of the pedestrian only. And so paint for me the process an organization would have to go through to accomplish that.
I do have a solution for that. So, Councilwoman Jordan, so if you're having an event and you need signs as you're recommending for public safety, as part of the permitting process to go in that area, then the city could require safety signs, right? And we would have these developed or recommended size or safety signs, or we can even create them. And this is just kind of thinking creatively, kind of off the cuff, but where you could place those, and you wouldn't run into the same issues that are running, because it's an event, they're part of government speech because we're requiring safety signs to be put up, and that's what would happen. But I would not recommend that we're getting in trouble as advertisement signs for that event. If it's strictly like a safety, watch out for pedestrians, or don't run, that's perfectly appropriate, because we can include that as part of the permitting process, and that could be associated with government speech.
But to get there, you'd lose your spontaneity. You'd have to factor in processing time to do something with the city, get a permit,
You would lose some of that.
apply, get response from the city, adjust to the response from the city, bring your application back and eventually get a structured permit for that type of event.
Well, and it doesn't have to be overly burdensome,
Right.
it could be something with working with public, and we tend to do that.
We are
but-
Santa Barbara,
But
though.
we are Santa Barbara,
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
But it could be something with working with streets and public works, like if there's some event where it's just able to use or get those approved signs from public works to place in there. As long as there has a safety component, and they just notify public works, it doesn't have to be something onerous to like be able to do that.
Okay.
But if we're just strictly talking safety signs, we should make it available and readily available. But we couldn't have any signs, sandwich board, A-frame signs that are talking about advertising. They really have to be safety-based, like, watching.
I'm going to ponder that tension between now and full council
Sure.
and see if it can't work on something else. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Gutierrez, do you have any questions at this time? Okay, thank you. Okay, and then I have a couple questions too to follow up there. So just starting on page 4 of the ordinance, and these are things we discussed before, so I just want to make sure. Under J, civic event sign, so one question I have is if the farmer's market or similar, would that fall under the civic event sign definition?
It wouldn't definitely, let me just pull up the civic event on 4 just to make sure.
It's on page 4 of the draft.
You know what, if it is sponsored by the city, and I'm not 100%, I think it is sponsored by the farmer's market, but if I were to confirm that it would be, it's a very good point. If it was confirmed by a civic event that's actually sponsored by the city, and open to the public, but it does not, but it's saying the key is it does not include the sale of goods or services. So it wouldn't be that, but a solution to Councilmember Jordan's issue is because it's a regular recurring event and they're already operating under certain provisions, we can easily place like safety signs for the farmer's market to deal with that. So that wouldn't be an issue going forward. But under this current definition, it wouldn't meet a civic event sign.
Thank you. And then I guess, is it necessary that it says does not include the sale of goods or services? I mean, I can understand if it's like an individual storefront, but
Sure.
something like the farmer's market or the maker's market or things that are sort of open to the public and members of the public could apply to be selling at that market or something like that.
We have that for extra protection. I mean, it's not 100, I would argue maybe not 100% necessary, but I'll at least give you the thought process, because when you're generally thinking of civic event, you're thinking of, like, for example, something the city celebrates, like, Black History Month or something like that. That's generally what would constitute a civic event. It's not predicated upon, a sale of a good or a transaction, like a marketplace. So that was why that language was placed there. Does it have to necessarily meet that definition? Not necessarily, but it was placed in there for best practices. A lot of public agencies were including such language as they were updating their sign ordinance too. So that's where that came from.
Okay. I think that I'm wondering too if it's not whose primary purpose is the sale of goods or services or something, because I can imagine there are many events, like celebrating Black History Month, where some things are for sale, but it's not the sort of primary purpose of bringing people together, and I wouldn't want that.
That could be there, whereas primary purpose is not from an economic standpoint. Yeah, I can definitely look at that
Okay.
before we come to council.
Thank you. And then, I guess I'll go in order here. So then on page 15, I just have a bunch of just little nitpicky things, but on page 15, we talk about number 7, no more than 12 balloons for any single business or residence. And I mean, while we're at it, I'm not sure why we're having any balloons. We don't want Mylar balloons. We don't want the ribbons that are associated with balloons. We don't want latex balloons. So I'll just make, I guess, a comment that I don't really see that we need balloons. or a number on the balloons. I guess my question would be, can you tell me more about that one?
Sure. So that was language from the original ordinance. It was not touched. I mean, there's no legal concern regarding, balloons or having a numerical number. So that's something that, I could take recommendation from here and make changes. But I have no legal concern with, having, do we want to have a limitation or not? I mean, sometimes you'll see signs and they'll have balloons attached to it. So it's I put it to the committee in terms of how they would like to address that. But there's not a legal issue with that.
It seems to me we could be sort of silent on balloons.
Yes, we could absolutely be silent with balloons and
Not
just take
prohibit,
that.
not.
I doubt someone's going to put 500 balloons on a sign, but
Yeah.
if it starts happening, we'll come back here.
And then maybe there could be, for attachments not above the roof ridge line, because maybe you can attach a flag or a
Sure.
sparkler, or, maybe we could, if we feel we need to do that, then
And-
otherwise I think we could just,
We can definitely take the number of balloons out. The idea of the roof ridge line, our sight lines are are important in this town and all that. So the idea is not having these really tall balloons kind of blocking views. So, but I can,
so maybe any attachment that doesn't go above
got it.
the roof ridge line, something like that.
Perfect.
Thank you. And then page 19, about flags. I guess I have questions about, a question, but then maybe a comment, but I guess I don't really see why we need to limit the number of flags on a flagpole, especially on a private residence or something like that. If I want to have my pride flag and my butterfly flag and any other flag, it doesn't seem that the number of flags is such an issue. If you could just talk to me about the number. And then also if a person has, a huge property, acres property, limiting the number of flagpoles on a property, can you apply for an exception? Is there a way to do that?
So, Chair Stanton, really good question. So this is kind of language that existed prior to it. So there's no legal basis at all for having a limit on number of flags. Now, as you said, to be clear for anyone listening into this, this is on private properties. There's nothing to do with the public right-of-way. I would think then, the only consideration you would look at from this is, and it kind of has that in there, is not so much focusing on the number, but the dimensions of the flag, right? And maybe having a size limitation. You could get a flag that's, entirely huge, and, that's when you're going more maybe aesthetic issues. And so, while it's perfectly legal to have a equal limit or size, I can't answer you in terms of what the purpose would be to have a limit of a certain amount of flags there, but I can definitely see why you would want to have a dimension limitation on flags. So we can edit that as well.
Yeah, I could see a dimension limitation, but I don't have the appetite to limit the number of flags people have on their private property. So I think maybe we could look at that. Or the number of poles. I mean, I guess it could get out of hand, but have we ever had really complaints about too many flag poles on a private property?
I've never heard of one.
Me neither. So, okay. I think that one stood out to me. It was flagged. Let's see. And then, is a piece of paper a sign? Like if it says lost cat?
Piece of paper, I mean, it's, like a lot of times signs will be communicative, right? So that's why even flags placed in public right-of-way is communicative speech on that. Something in terms of like lost cat, is it a piece of paper that's stuck? It's a good question. I mean, that issue has never been really addressed. Does that constitute a sign? I could see people arguing it does not. It's a simple piece of paper put in about a lost cat. Other people can say, be really strict interpreters and say, well, it's communicative and all this. We did talk last time about that issue of someone placing a sign like, on a piece of paper on that. If we're treating those equally, like someone's putting a piece of paper and all that, we don't run across constitutional issues. But staff is not enforcing on that piece of paper. Staff's really enforcing on people attaching like big cardboard signs, utility poles, or A-frames, or any of that. So that's where the focus is. So to me, it's an issue that really doesn't, when we're doing this amendment, does not need to be addressed, and something that we're not going to enforce on if someone's attaching a piece of paper that says garage sale down the block, and this on basis size of a placard card or a lost cat and all that.
So we're not interpreting a piece
We're
of
not,
paper
we're
as a
not,
sign,
yeah, we're not
a single
interpreting
piece of, okay.
Yeah, we're not interpreting or
Okay.
addressing it with this ordinance.
I always approach these ordinances as like I follow the rules, whether
Sure.
or not they're being enforced or not. So if it was against the rules, I would tell my child, no, you can't put a piece of paper saying lost cat. So I don't want that to be
Yeah.
okay.
Nor do we want to cause heartbreak, so.
No. Okay, thank you. And then page 35, maybe it's a question, but it's really more of a comment. I'll start with my comment, and then maybe the question will be, does it have to be this way? The reference to Spanish colonial revival / Mediterranean in page 35, B, numbers 1 and 2, can that just say consistent with El Pueblo Viejo landmark district standards specified in the chapter? I'm not really comfortable having, first of all, the word colonial, but, the name of the styles. What if the El Pueblo Viejo standards allow for indigenous Chumash colors? Or, I know it allows colors of the Mexican flag on different times. I don't know. It seemed overly restrictive.
Sure, I'll turn it to to Ellen to talk about, that was something inputted by community development, so they'd probably be better to speak into it. So.
Thank you, Chair Sneddon, and to the Ordinance Committee, Ellen Kokinda, Design Review Supervisor. So we were really just swapping out the term Hispanic. There's not a Hispanic style of architecture that is old language that we've moved on from, and so we simply replaced it with what is in the most recent historic resources guidelines that was approved by council. So there's the consistency, and that is a specific architectural style that is mandated in El Pueblo Viejo. So that's just a consistency matter and trying to move away from different language. So, and we've already updated our guidelines to reflect that. So that's the rationale for it. And we have approved colors within El Pueblo Viejo, and it's an entire document that applicants can go and pick out this building colors and awning colors and different things that they don't have, that just qualify for an administrative approval, so they don't have to go to HLC at a public hearing. So it's just kind of a streamlining effort for applicants. So that's kind of the rationale. But we could, I mean, it could be more broad, it just wouldn't necessarily be consistent with the kind of point applicants to what we are talking about. But
Yeah. I think that's actually what I'm suggesting, is point them to the historic resources guidelines of El Pueblo Viejo instead of naming the style, because then if those are updated, a new color, a new something, then it's a self-contained and you don't have to then go back and change this ordinance.
Yeah, I
So-
mean, I think that's a simple edit for sure.
Okay, yeah, okay. So I think I'll make that suggestion in those two. Yeah, not trying to change the historic resources guidelines, but just have an easy reference to them. Okay, and then on page 37, I had a question about imitation wood, but I'll leave that off for now. And then I know I asked this question, I think, in some briefings, but I just wanted to say, as an example, the flags on State Street at Las Positas that are out now sort of regularly, how would these changes impact those flags, say?
Chair Stennis, so each individual flag, as long as they're within the dimensions under the new section we kind of focused on today, 2270, subsection 26, 03026, they would be allowed but only be placed during 42-hour period. So they would be allowed over the weekend, but just like all other signs, they would have to be removed. So that's how it would affect it.
Okay, and so in that case, those flags are considered signs, so
They're
all the
considered-
same rules?
Yeah, it's private communication on public right-of-way, correct? And that's not sponsored by the city in any way, those have signs. So we would treat that the same as we would any other sign.
Okay, and it's communication, even though it's a flag of a
It-
country?
It is, it's considered symbolic, a sign, so, someone it doesn't have to be a flag. Someone could take, for example, a painting and put it on cardboard of the Ukrainian flag, right? It would still, why wouldn't it have that flag cloth form? It would still be considered a sign.
And if those flags were to be up, would there be a mechanism for those flags to be up week-long? Or is it, or even if they were moved back onto private property? Or, and again, this isn't about these specific flags, I'm using this as an example. Yeah.
They, they would not be able to be up because it would be content-based, we'd have to treat everything equal. So they would have to be down during the week period. Now, if it was on private property, then you would revert to the subsection we talked about earlier regarding flags and flag poles and everything else. But that's what it would default to.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions for now. If we have no further questions at this time, we can take public comment.
Our first public comment will be Jaime Limon.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm presently on the sign committee. I've been there about 7 years. And first of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Dormitz for finally getting forward these ordinance amendments. They're long overdue. It was something that I think I started back when I was on city staff about 8 years ago. And so I'm glad they're coming forward. But I do have some questions specific to the ordinance itself, and I'd like to have some further clarification. The first item is there's some types of portable signs, I guess, or prohibited signs that are being eliminated on page 24, numbers 5, 6, and 7. And they talk about signs visible from the public street or parking lot attached or placed for merchandise sales. And we've had that issue where people putting up signs in parking lots. And so if it's not considered an off-premises sign because it's on premises, but it's not on the building, I just feel that that's not very clear enough. We eliminate that section. If the Attorney's Office thinks we can enforce in another manner, that's fine. I just don't see it yet. So I'm a little questioning whether that should be eliminated. Same thing with the following item about signs that rotate, move, glare, flash, change, reflect, blink, or appear. I mean, those are the types of, I think we call them nuisance lighting, where people put them in their windows, shopping, their storefronts, and just to grab attention. They're rotating copy, or they blink and flash. We have that for open and close, open signs, and that's just something that the city has not historically allowed. So again, I don't want to go back. I want to maintain what we think is in the ordinance that we can point to that says you have to get rid of these things if they're pointed out to be not consistent with the ordinance. And then with respect to vehicles, the last one about off-premises sign, we've had some issues where people are parking vehicles and putting signs on vehicles. And technically they're off-premises sign, but there was a question about whether we could enforce vehicle signs, whether it's a right, First Amendment issue. But I think if they're advertising a business, I think that's different than putting your personal statement on a vehicle. So I wanted that pointed out. And then the definition of certain signs, we're having problems with feather flags. And when you look under prohibited signs, it just talks about flags. But I think if we're really trying to be specific, the people that come forward to try to get approvals, they say, well, where does it say I can't have a feather flag? That's, we want to tell people it's a feather flag, it's not allowed in the city. Or unless you're going to say they're allowed, then, right now in Milpas, we have a big problem with people putting up feather flags. One business puts it up and now everybody starts putting them up. So at some point, my colleague here is going to talk about enforcement, maybe what we can do to try to implement these ordinances.
And Mr. Limon, I'd like to give you the time that you need to finish your comments.
Okay.
You don't feel like you have to just...
Okay, I just know we're running late. And so, last thing is regarding the open house signs and the realtor signs, I think this is a good movement to try to make sure that the real estate industry is aware that there are limits, because we often see that they're being put everywhere. I think there's a distinction between open house signs and permanent for sale signs. And we're seeing actually permanent for sale signs being put in the right of way because they don't want to put in their front yards. They actually dig them in the right of way, and people don't complain about it because they assume they're allowed. So, I think that everyone should be fairly treated, and certain properties should not have the right to go in the right of way for those types of signs.
Okay, thank you so much.
Next speaker is Elizabeth Sorgman.
Good afternoon. Let's see if I can get this down. Oops, I'll get on my tippy test. All right, my name's Elizabeth Sorgman, and I am the chair of the Access Advisory Committee, and just wanted to express a couple of points that we discussed a few times at our meetings. So one, I think Mike Jordan brought up a question about what is the definition of parkway. When we were given that presentation, the parkway was anything that had concrete. So if that's going to change, then we have a big concern about that. The second is the Access Advisory Committee. We've got a few disabled members who really struggle with being able to get around on public right-of-ways, especially downtown. And so we were concerned, and one of the comments was that, are we trying to tell the disabled community that they can't go downtown on the weekends because these signs will be in the way? And so we came up, or one of the members came up with the option of putting stakes so that someone would have to put it in the ground so that it wouldn't block the sidewalk. And that's one of the biggest issues is that there is no enforcement. There's absolutely no enforcement. When we drove down before this meeting, there were probably 4 or 5 signs that we saw in the sidewalks. And so people come to complain about their inability to be able to get around some of these boards. And so that was why we came up with the solution of, if there's a stake that they have to use, then that's going to mandate that it's going to be placed outside of the sidewalk. And that was really driven by the fact that there's no enforcement. If there was enforcement, then maybe we wouldn't have this same recommendation. We would be okay with A-frames. But the city doesn't have any mechanism. There's no staff, excuse me, on the weekend. I mean, if someone wants to complain, there's no one to call. And even if they call, they don't get a response. And so that's, again, why we chose to say a stake. Your comment, Mr. Jordan, regarding if there's a little bit of area in front of a post, well, you're neglecting the fact that someone may be blind, and they're not necessarily going to go in a straight direction. They're using their cane to tap around. And so when they tap that pole or that A-frame, they may trip. And so it gets really dicey with the definition. And so if that definition of a parkway is going to change, then I think that our Access Advisory Committee should be able to at least have some additional say in what the ordinance is going to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask for clarification? So do you think the Access Advisory Committee would like to see the ordinance again?
Well, if the definition of parkway is going to change, then yes.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Ken Sorgman?
Good afternoon, Chair Sneddon and committee members. I was going to submit this letter, but I'd like to read it instead. My name is Ken Sorgman. I'm the chair for the sign committee, and I'm a retired sign maker for 43 years in Santa Barbara. So I am well aware of the ordinance and changes over the years, and I've made it my effort to submit sign applications that complied with the ordinance. And so I'm here today because the sign ordinance is being systematically undermined because of lack of enforcement. Let me illustrate a simple example. Recently, we had a submittal we reviewed, and we made some suggestions. Part of the sign application was accepted, but there were other parts that needed some revisions, some changes. And so we requested that they came back, and they said they would. Well, they just went ahead and put up all the signs, and without coming back to the committee. And this is not a necessarily a isolated incident. It happens quite a bit. And so the consequences of this, obviously, are that there's less and less permits being applied. There's also businesses that are following the rules. They're being placed at a competitive disadvantage because there are other businesses that are just going about and putting up signs. The word has, unfortunately, has gotten out that there is no sign enforcement. So there are signs going up all over the place. Recently, I took a walk down State Street, and I covered 5 blocks, and I documented 24 signs that were illegal, unpermitted, and in some cases, electrical signs that have not been permitted, not been inspected. So this can be a safety issue. So as a sign committee, we are frustrated, to say the least. And we need your help to restore integrity to the process. And we have some specific recommendations. One would be a dedicated enforcement office, even part-time. I understand that staff is limited at this point, but that they could focus on sign violations, and maybe that would just, maybe once a week they would dedicate to this. And also a graduated firm fine structure that increases with continued non-compliance. We'd like to see quarterly meetings with enforcement staff so that we can review some of this. And I must say the sign committee remains committed to preserving Santa Barbara's visual heritage, but we need the tools to be effective. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Brian Johnson.
Good afternoon, Chair Snedden, committee members. I'll be quick. On behalf of the Santa Barbara Association of Realtors, we just wanted to thank you and thank staff for working with us over these past few months in revising the proposed ordinance to make sure that our members, the realtors of Santa Barbara, were able to continue to have their open house signs in the needed areas to make sure that the community was able to find those open houses, and that the importance of being able to find a home was kept in place. So with that, thank you for the language. We're okay with it. We can live with it. We understand there may be still some things to be worked out on other things, but we're certainly appreciative of the process. Thank you.
Thank you.
And our final speaker will be Robin Elander.
Good afternoon, council members, members of the public, sign committee. My name is Robin Elander. I'm the executive director for the Downtown Santa Barbara Improvement Association. As part of this update, the Downtown Santa Barbara Improvement Association recommends that the Ordinance Committee consider the following enhancements to promote both aesthetic consistency and navigational ease in the downtown core. One, creation of a standardized signage templates for new businesses. To support new and small businesses and reduce barriers of entry, we propose the implementation of pre-approved signage templates. These templates would meet all regulatory design standards, allowing new businesses to install compliant signage quickly and affordably. This approach would streamline permitting, enhance visual cohesion along commercial corridors, and encourage compliance by simplifying the process. The second is implementation of a coordinated wayfinding program. We recommend a wayfinding program for the downtown Santa Barbara area in lieu of sandwich board signs. We know that those sandwich board signs are a key lifeline for some small businesses, yet we also understand that there are challenges with them. Strategically placed wayfinding programs with uniform signage can guide both locals and visitors to key destinations, enhancing the pedestrian experience and maintaining the historic character and walkability of our downtown. Together, these measures would elevate the visual environment, support business success, and create a more welcoming and navigable downtown experience. So we urge the Ordinance Committee to integrate these recommendations into the amendment and to better reflect the needs of our evolving downtown community. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
also, thank you so much for all your work on this very complicated ordinance.
And do we have any speakers online? No. Okay. It would, as an Access Advisory Committee Chair,
Comment to what she just shared.
would it be commenting as an Access Advisory Committee Chair? Okay, then, please.
I just want to say, the idea of having standard signs, I think, is a great idea. And just because I'm married to the person who's the chair of the sign committee, I know that they've done some research in terms of getting signs easier. I think it was 70% of the signs now are consent, so they don't have to go through the full board. But if we did have a template that kind of gave guidelines for what certain things were and where they couldn't be placed, it would really help business owners know what accessibility requirements are. I know when I was working at the city and we were trying to put this together for the parklets, we didn't do a good job of giving property owners information. All we said was, you must comply with ADA. Well, what does that mean if you have no idea what the regulations are? First of all, city does not enforce ADA. It's the California Building Code that it enforces. But we gave property owners no guidelines. I think that would be a wonderful thing to be able to pass on to business owners. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it is now to the committee. Who would like to? Okay, Councilmember Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just had another question, John. So undoubtedly in our future sometime, we're going to get a request to do the blasphemy of a digital light show on a historic structure. They do them all over the world. I'm just wondering, so does that fall somewhere in here as an event that can be pursued? Is it prohibited? There's a section in there on digital kind of thing. So typically, I've seen those in other places where they could involve vendors and booths. I've seen them in other places where it's strictly a store. They just did one in Rome that's just strictly a historic kind of cool, particular jubilee or thing kind of thing. So I think that's coming. So what will that look like when it gets here with us?
That, Chair Stunning and Councilmember Jordan, that wouldn't constitute a sign. That would be
Okay.
a artistic show display.
Strictly an
Similar
event.
to like a firework display or
Okay.
something like that. We'd be good on that. We do have, just to be clear, we did maintain like glaring signs, all that. That's still in the prohibited signs. So I wanted to address that. So that remains prohibited, or, causing glare, lighting up. Mobile signs, we have a weird, prohibition in the ordinance of not allowing mobile signs on vehicles or boats that carry 19 or more passengers. We don't have anything regarding vehicles or anything less. That's when you run into constitutional issues, right to travel. And this is mainly meant to be a land use sign ordinance, not dealing with the roadways, nor will we have the staff the ability to stop cars or anything on that
Okay.
issue.
So just a couple comments, quick comments. So, I'm going to continue to think about and push you on something that gets out of this bureaucracy mess, even though I understand the reason for it. But, if it's last week and the city is closed on Friday and somebody has a great idea for a downtown event that involves public safety signage or advertising signage or things for sale for that Saturday, and the city's closed on Friday, there's no doubt in my mind that it's going to take more than 2 or 3 work days to get through whatever the permit process is. And I just think we're missing the world going by if we haven't thought hard about how to have a process that responds to that. It doesn't just get it into a staff person's desk and it sits there like any other land use process we have. And if that can be a third-party partner that handles that, like, I don't even know what the acronym is right now, so downtown org, similar to what I was talking about before, or if we would agree to staff that as a function with a, turnaround time of 24 hours kind of thing. If here's the sheet, you're going to meet all these guidelines or requirements, whatever, you bring it in, we'll have that ready to go for you tomorrow kind of thing. I just think we need to have some thought over that, or we're simply increasing the amount of enforcement that we have to do, because people will say the heck with it and will go back out there in the street and just increase the amount of enforcement that's not being done already.
And if I may comment quickly on that.
Yep.
We can do something like that without needing to place the ordinance on hold, making changes. Mr. Eiley and I were talking about, in the future, developing kiosks where you can have such that. You can create maybe a policy online where you're filling in these provisions and doing something like that. So we eventually will have potentially the creativity to that without affecting the content of this ordinance. So we'll definitely can look into that.
I guess, just respond to that point. I just think until we do that, we increase the amount of people not doing what we want them to do, rather than, it won't even stay just the people that aren't doing the same already the number will go up, because people coming forward that didn't have to do that before now have to do that. We'll just say, okay, I tried once, it was a nightmare, now I'm just going to go do it, I'll be done in a day. Even if it was like any kind of sign, if you were talking about if it could meet a criteria or a set of guidelines, if it's up and down in 6 hours for an event, similar to your 42-hour thought process on the weekend, what's the harm? If it's Monday through Friday and it's 3 hours of line dancing, really? I have to go through the same process to put up my signs out there as somebody who's going to do an event with 10,000 people shutting down a whole block kind of thing.
True. I mean, the safest way is like if you have safety signs, and if they have the signs in their business, it's on the public right away, they're allowed to do it. I mean, the idea, what we heard enforcement and public comment, the idea this ordinance does now is people are not cooperating, we can just pull those signs, but we can think of other creative ways to get messaging across for either events or businesses. And I think that's where we're going to go to next. The first thing we need to do is get to control the situation and have a content neutral and an ordinance that's up to date with some teeth. And then I think that would be step 2 in going for that. I think that's an important issue, as you say.
And then just a couple comments on the comments I heard. Uniform signage is, I think, a dead end. I mean, I get the reason for it, but there's a reason for signs, and it's not to be uniform. The reason for signs are to be individually unique and attractive to people rather than look like the rest of the signs. So, you know, you really might as well just prohibit signs rather than just say they all have to be uniform. And we don't enforce, but we don't enforce every land use thing. I could, you know, 5 years I've been waiting for short-term vacation rentals, okay? So signs to me are pretty low on my priority list. But this ordinance actually is a huge improvement over what we had before. And I'll just give you an example. I think 2 examples of two restaurants on the State Street corridor that both had to be taken to Superior Court because they refused to open up the space on the sidewalk for ADA and take down their sandwich boards. Our only resolution at that time was to go to Superior Court and spend tens of thousands of dollars and waste a year for eventually them just taking their signs aside because we were going to do it. This gives us the opportunity just to drive a truck up and throw their signs in the back of the truck and laugh at them as we drive away with their signs if they're violating the ordinance. And they can come pick them up somewhere else at a storage yard. So I think from an enforcement standpoint, this is a huge improvement over the way we've been handcuffed in the past. I think that's it. I guess my key takeaway point is I still believe there's not here from the government knocking on your door to help, that there's a method really to there's got to be an easier method than throwing everybody into the same ordinance and not having a baby ordinance or something, a baby set of criteria where you can get in and out and pretty easily start on a Monday, have your event on a Friday night, and you're done without having to spend a lot of time going back and forth through city bureaucracy. So happy to work on you with that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Councilmember Gutierrez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for city staff and for everybody for coming in and voicing your opinion about this. I am going to do something rare and not support moving this to full council. I just feel like, especially now in our current climate of our economy, it's hard enough to run a business, and for us to put more restrictions on how to advertise that business, I think is pretty detrimental. And, you know, we heard from the public that enforcement was a big deal and the lack of enforcement. I'm willing to support just enforcing the ordinances we have now as opposed to implementing new ones or changing the ones we have. Because I know for a fact years ago, when I got elected, there was a barber who someone reported his signage, then they had to remove their signage, and then this barber went around town and reported every barber shop that was in violation. And it was really toxic to hear that from our community's barbers, that somebody was reporting them to the city. They had to remove signs that were there for 40 years because someone was reported, and then they took it upon themselves. So, well, if it happened to me, I'm going to make it happen to everybody else. And I'm kind of worried that we're creating this environment for our business owners, and I don't like it. I don't think it's going to be beneficial, especially now with what's happening in our economy. So I'm asking city staff to push further in enforcing the ordinances we have now. And then maybe once things settle down in our economy, we can come back to revise this stuff. But right now, I don't think it's fair to our businesses. And, you know, on a side note, I just feel like lately the city has been, optically, it looks like we're being bullies to a lot of business owners and organizations. And to approve this would just further that narrative, and I'm not for it. We should be here to help them, not keep them from operating. So that's my 2 cents. The only thing I hear the most when it comes to signage is political campaign signs still being left up. But to be honest, the signs that are left up are the losers. So in a way, makes me feel good to see them still up. But that's just my personal opinion.
Thank you, Councilman Gutierrez. I think I have some questions, also some follow-up. Barber poles, that just brought that up. Are barber poles signs? How does this ordinance contemplate barber poles?
Barber poles would constitute a sign, Chair Sneddon, because it's universally recognized symbol, it's freestanding, separate, so it would.
So then, would it have to be in the window or under, like, because it's sort of a different construction and placement?
It could be in the window, it could be on their property, it could be in the threshold of their property, as long as it's not in the public right of way.
Okay.
That's the only issue.
Yeah. That was just the first question that came to mind. I appreciated your comments. It wasn't necessarily about that. To Mr. Limon's comments about putting number 5, 6, and 7 back in on page 24, if we could talk about that.
Those were just moved. They're in the ordinance. If you look at it above, they're there. They're just moved. If you look at on top of 24, we just made it clear they're under prohibited signs. Signs that rotate, move, glare, flash, reflect. You know, signs that create a hazard by obstructing clear views of pedestrian or vehicle traffic. So those general signs or those prohibitions are there. They were either moved or made more simple. So, for example, 6 is talking about glare and reflect and blink. You know, we made it a little more clear and all that. So they're still there. They're just not. They're in different locations. So on billboards, right? We have billboards or off-premises signs. So we made it much more simpler and concise. So we didn't eliminate those restrictions. We just moved them around or simplified or made it more clear.
Thank you. That addresses that. And then I had a question I forgot to ask earlier about neighborhood associations. It's very common. We talked about this before. I know Eucalyptus Hill Association, Riviera Association. It's hard to find your way in some of these areas, and it's not necessarily open to the public. I think they're neighborhood associations, and they also may be selling things like a membership or auction items or something like that. Would those be prohibited?
No, so on their private property, they can do it, or if it's in the parkway within that 42-hour window, they can do it.
Oh, they could do it in the
Yes,
parkway,
but outside-
okay.
But outside of they would not be able to.
They just have to have them on weekends, and then that would be
Yep.
good. Okay, okay. And then they had the question about signs on vehicles, in vehicles.
That would be very difficult. This is really a land-based ordinance,
Okay.
so we wouldn't be able to address really vehicles or enforce on that or
Okay.
anything like that.
So somebody could do any of these things, but in their vehicle, from their vehicle?
I mean, they could have like a sign, they could have a bunch of signs on their vehicles and are driving through. And the other part is, that's the other part of the constitutionality of it. Like, they're having all their vehicles, and as soon as they go outside the city limits, so a court would look at it like, so if they're driving up from Carpinteria, but then they cross Santa Barbara city limits, they have to take out those signs or from the doors, and then once they got out, that would be a right to travel, other issues that would.
I'm thinking parked vehicles. A
Oh.
vehicle parked in front of a business with a neon sign.
So the glaring and all that, that would not be allowed in that kind of issue.
Okay.
So we already have a prohibition on that. So even if they're parked and they're doing that, we can enforce on it. Now, it makes enforcement tricky because they're in a vehicle, they can always leave, but That would be, if they're parked and are having like a glaring sign,
Yeah.
that would be different. I would
Okay.
recommend we can enforce on that as the current ordinance.
And this issue of feather flags, I don't even know what a feather flag is.
I'm not familiar with that either, to be honest with you.
Councilmember?
It's just like a slender fabric.
Oh, I can picture like Six Flags or something like that.
Or the moving person, the kind of, the wind is blowing in and kind of giving.
It's just the pole that curves at the top.
A nylon,
and it's
okay,
just
got
like a
that.
thin fabric that has like the business name
Got
and
that.
welcome, we're open.
Okay, well, it seems like if we are identifying every other kind of thing, we either need a more general term that catches that, or to keep updating. I mean, I'm sure there will be some new kind of flag or a new kind
Sure,
of thing.
sure.
So that's an issue. And then, is the sign committee dissolved?
It was dissolved.
So if we wanted to revert this back to the sign committee, there is no sign committee?
There's no sign committee.
Okay.
In terms of, not sign committee, in terms of, there was a sign committee, obviously we have a sign committee in terms of, currently the members are here, but there's a specific committee that was put to talk about changes and amendments to the ordinance years ago, and that's what I'm referring to as being
Oh, it's like a
dissolved.
subcommittee.
It's a
has been
subcommittee,
Because
correct.
when I saw that the sign committee was
Correct. No, sign committee
dissolved,
is
I
still in
thought,
existence. It was a what I was referring to was a subcommittee that was made to do these changes years ago that never got through and dissolved.
okay. And then has HLC seen this ordinance or commented on it?
No, like I said, the reason we went this route is because we didn't want to deal really too much with aesthetics, right? That was not the intent. You know, because we had this case in Gilbert in 2014, and really when people ask about enforcement, our office advice right now is we can't enforce on signs in the public right of way. And the reason is you allow real estate signs, but you don't allow someone else. So if we were to enforce on someone come challenge and say, look, you allow real estate open house signs in the public right of way, you're now allowing my business sign or my public message sign, whatever it may be. And we would lose in that situation because that's what the Reed case stand for. So for years, we have had unenforceable signs when we're dealing with a public right of way. So I know the public gets upset with staff, but it is our advice based on the ordinance in its current shape that, you know, you can't put that on onus on staff. We can't enforce. So the idea of this ordinance, and I recommend that we allow this to go, and we can always tweak the ordinance from an aesthetic viewpoint or other things to go forward, is because these changes at least allow us to have an enforceable sign ordinance, right? Because it's content neutral. And we're saying you can't have it in this zone and anywhere else in the city. It has to be in the parkway, and it has to be during these 42 hours with these size limitations and everything else. And if you violate that and put them up with these restrictions, we can immediately take them down. That gives us immediate relief to deal with it, as Councilwoman Jordan said, in terms of not having to deal with it because it's in the ordinance. It's content neutral, and it creates some kind of regulation for staff to deal with. If we don't have that, we continue on this road of just having unenforceable sign ordinance. And so that was the goal of making these changes. We didn't really go too much into aesthetics, so that's why we decided not to bring it to HLC or other groups. If we want to do that for aesthetic changes later on, we would definitely do so.
Thank you. I think, because as I think my comment of where I might be going with this is that I do support a standardized template that would, that could be a starting point, and people could then apply and do different sign things, but it could get them up and running in El Pueblo Viejo. The wayfinding program, I think, will be part of the State Street Master Plan. Those would clearly have to go through HLC. And also, it could be a standardized template for the spontaneous events, Councilmember Jordan, that you're referring to. So you could check out from the city, just like you check out buckets to do a beach cleanup, you could check out from the city the boards that say these blocks are, you know, an event is happening, and then you could, you know, add your words to it. I don't even know what it would be, but there could be some standardized template that.
You can, Chair Sonny, you can absolutely do that. You can have requirements that, like, sandwich board signs have, like, specific aesthetic requirements made of certain materials, environmentally friendly materials. I mean, there are things we can get creative.
Yes.
This is just to get us out of the murkiness we've been in. And then I think there's a second level to this, and that's a longer-term project, and that's something that would involve input from various departments, various groups, like you mentioned, because then you're dealing with really aesthetics. This is just, this stab at it is just to take us legally sound.
Yeah.
And there's a whole nother level we can look at this ordinance down the road.
So I guess I'll make my comments here, and then we'll decide what we want to do with it. I'm sort of in between the two here. I'm concerned about ADA and accessibility on the sidewalks. I'm concerned about El Pueblo Viejo. And honestly, I'm not as concerned in the outlying areas from there. I appreciate when a neighborhood association has signs to show me the way, even if it's on a Thursday night. I appreciate if film festival is having an event up in the hillside. I appreciate the flags at Las Positas and State. And I think in some of the sort of areas that aren't El Pueblo Viejo, if it's not completely out of hand, I don't see it as something that needs to be enforced on, and I understand the complications of that. How do you stop it from getting out of hand? But things like, yard sale or signs up for lost cat or bake sale at the school, those are things that I think could be interpreted as being, in violation of the sign ordinance if somebody were really to press it. And that does lead me to another question, actually. Who are complaints sent to? What does enforcement look like?
Well, that's an excellent question, Chestnut. Because we really haven't enforced on signs in the public right-of-way, I've seen complaints go to community development sometimes public works. It depends on the location. So if it's like downtown parking will get it. And that's why downtown parking was like, we deal with a lot of this. We don't have a mechanism, and we don't have really a space where we can allow them. And then if it's other areas, sometimes community development will get it. But the issue has been that we haven't enforced on these. We haven't taken these signs down. We haven't done that because of the current state of the ordinance. You could deal with a sign dealing with an ADA violation, right? But then that makes it so much more complex, because then you're asserting ADA and you're getting a cast member and you're taking this whole different route when you can simply say you can't impede access to the ordinance. And if you do that, we can just immediately remove the sign and store it for 90 days. You can come get it. And if you put it right back there again, we'll take it right back down. So that's who the complaints have been to, but the enforcement has been lacking because of the current state of the ordinance.
Okay.
Chair Snedden, may I also add that just in addition to the constitutionality of it, of course, COVID hit, and there was kind of a political impetus not to enforce and kind of a pause on all enforcement, and that really never picked up. Our zoning enforcement moved into Building and Safety Division under code compliance, and the priority, I just want to acknowledge this kind of a history, that the priority of signs went from number 2 on the list to enforcement issues to the very bottom. So there's been a proliferation of signage, not just the A-frames or the prohibited signs, but also signs that are actually attached to buildings. So there are people who go through the process, through the sign committee, and there are people who don't. Historically, when I first started in the planning division, again, when there was zoning enforcement, we would do sign sweeps because we would get a complaint about a particular sign on one building or one business, but in order to kind of be fair and equitable, we'd go up and down State Street, or there are times we do Upper State, Milpas, so we kind of tackle it by geography and try to enforce kind of on a larger scale so that it wasn't one business saying, hey, the city came after me, but they didn't come after you, and that's really, it doesn't feel good. And then as committee member Oscar Gutierrez mentioned, that sometimes when enforcement comes through, it kind of sets off this tone, and then we get 50 new sign enforcement cases because someone gets really frustrated and they feel kind of, hey, this is on me. So then our list gets longer in general. But that's kind of the history of it. We haven't really picked up enforcement, so it's tough. From the sign committee's perspective, I know that it's hard to process these things, ask applicants to do that, but there's just some inconsistencies there. But this is the constitutionality is the first step towards enforcement to be able to look at it. But I just still want to acknowledge that it's currently probably close to the bottom of the list. And for health and safety, and I just want to also mention health and safety is the priority.
So constitutionality-wise, can El Pueblo Viejo be treated differently than non-historic landmark different districts?
Yes, you could,
Yes.
as long as you apply the same rule across that way and you're content neutral, you can draw distinctions to different zoning or locations in the area. And then the ordinance provides its basis of lack of parkway space in the high pedestrian traffic. So you could do that.
So I think that's the bottom line for me of where I'm landing at this moment, is that it's maybe not quite ready. I think so much work has gone into it. It's so detailed that it may be unintentionally onerous in some ways. And for me, the priority would be ADA accessibility in all areas of the city, and then really focusing in on, since enforcement is an issue anyway, focusing in on El Pueblo Viejo and seeing where that gets us. And Councilmember Jordan, you have a comment?
Another question kind of to that and Mr. Gutierrez's points. So I just want to see if I clearly understand this. I think I do in my mind. But if the part on enforcement that is in here doesn't go through, the process for enforcement right now are just notices for violation. And if somebody declines to follow those notices, the only option for us is to file a lawsuit in Superior Court. But if these provisions go through on this ordinance, we can physically just drive up anytime and take an illegal set of signage off the street, correct?
Chair Senate and Councilmember Jordan, yes, that is a design and mechanism that we don't even have to be complaint-based.
Right.
We see the most serious, most egregious signs. It's blocking ADA access. It's, people are just running into them, causing a safety hazard. We don't have to wait. It allows us to confiscate them. The only requirement we have to do is, under the California Civil Code, is hold them for 90 days.
Right.
But we don't have to provide notice or anything. We just take them and store them.
And I sort of had an anecdotal example or two of how the current process works. I wasn't off on that, right? It doesn't work well.
It does,
right?
it doesn't work,
It-
period. It doesn't work, period, because we have inconsistencies with the ordinance.
Right.
And so the idea, the mechanism was, first, we decided to maintain, so all these signs currently we are talking about, they're not allowed under the ordinance, right? There was one exception, the real estate signs. And so we came back in October, we said, no signs at all in the public right of way. And then we decided to create, I think, a very interesting yet legal compromise where we're talking about outside EPV, we're talking about having this limitation with these kind of restrictions and allowing it. And then EPV, because of the issues of access and high pedestrian rate and public safety, eliminating it. And so that's the compromise, because believe it or not, right now, the way the code is, doesn't allow any of it anyway, except for real estate. But the problem is, that's what makes it, have the city have liability, because we do create this content-based exception.
And so stalling on that part of it, at least the enforcement part, it wouldn't be far-fetched to say that if we continue what we've been trying to do in the past, all we're doing is repeating enforcement action that was not effective. And while we may be supporting businesses with good signs that are out there illegally, the bad signs that are out there also illegally are also not going to be taken care of, because our enforcement method without these greater tools of confiscation have been ineffective in the past.
Correct. And I would add, this is what I would hope it is designed, that because of the lack of enforcement, because of that 2014 Supreme Court decision, there have been over a decade of people accustomed just being able to place signs and nothing happening.
Right.
And the idea is that this will allow us to reset that. And then I think going to your point of working on recalibrating and creating a mechanism down the road that maintains public safety, maintains aesthetics, and maintains the compliance. But first, people have to recognize and be frank that the city is really serious, and we have the ability to take these signs that, cause obstructions and everything else.
And I bristle when you call that lack of enforcement, because what sane mind would think the correct enforcement process is to spend $75,000 in Superior Court for a year and a half to try and solve a sandwich board sitting in the middle of the sidewalk in the 900 or 1000 block of State Street? That's not a good enforcement process.
Sure.
We need a better enforcement process.
Or going through criminal court or any of that. That takes a lot of
Yeah.
resources away from the city.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, with that in mind, and thank you for that, Councilmember Jordan, I have one more question, and then I think we're probably ready to at least move on what we have, or some of us already move on what we have. Under the El Pueblo Viejo section again, I guess one overarching question is, it seems like what we're trying to do is have like pre-HLC approval in here, and there's some standards in there, but then it goes into landscaping, and, landscaping and EPV should conform to El Pueblo Viejo guidelines of preferred plants. And I'm just wondering if we could just have them approved by HLC. That there's the general, if there's guidance on that. And there's so much in here that does have to do with design for hotels and motels in El Pueblo Viejo. These should be this, the sizes. There's a lot of requirements in here, which there should be. Rightly so there. I guess have a
Chair
question about
Snedden,
that.
I think so. This is likely referring to ground signs that, the sign committee has their purview. They're looking at signage on the
Okay.
site. But there are other portions of the site that are under HLC's purview, and that would be landscape design and this and that. So there's trying to kind of be this coordination to kind of help guide applicants. If you are doing a ground sign and you're proposing, any kind of new landscaping, just kind of think about these things as you're designing it. So generally, we do see exterior alterations. Someone could come in just for signs, but if they are proposing other things, it's kind of like you have to pick a lane, and there's different aspects. And there's still things we can approve administratively from an HLC standpoint, but or sometimes those items have to go to a hearing at the HLC. So it's kind of in figuring out what is being proposed and what's under the sign committee's purview, and then what's under HLC's purview. So I think this ordinance, or that aspect of it, is just trying to help you understand there are design guidelines and expectations that we're trying to set.
Thank you. I guess maybe not as part of this ordinance, but it seems to me that it might be worth looking at. If something's in El Pueblo Viejo, just go to HLC instead of having to go to this committee to work through your sign and this committee to work through the rest of the elements, and then how do those elements come together? It's just maybe a suggestion to look at that. There's so much in here that's just dedicated to El Pueblo Viejo, and it should be. I'm just, and that might be something the sign committee could weigh in on at a different time, not as part of this ordinance moving on, but something I think HLC might want to look at too, or members of each talk to each other. Because I'm sure this list came about by that kind of coordination, and I'm just thinking of an applicant not having to do these two separate processes.
And guidelines, I think you're referring to.
Yes,
Great.
and the guidelines. Okay, so I'll make my comments, and then I think Councilmember Jordan may be ready for a motion. Yeah, he's over ready. So in general, I didn't want to limit the number of flags on a pole. I want to make sure that a paper sign that says Lost Cat or bake sale or some other information is not going to be enforced on. Also, in neighborhood associations, they may happen to be selling something like a membership, but I wouldn't want them to be limited. I do support, outside of this ordinance, a standardized template, particularly downtown, and then people could work outside of that to go beyond that through HLC, through the sign committee. the wayfinding program, I think, is going to be part of the State Street Master Plan. I think the right-of-way being clear for ADA compliance is probably the most important aspect of all of this. So I really want to make sure that that is staying in the center of there. And I think because of the comments that Councilmember Jordan made, that right now we have no ability to enforce short of lawsuits, then I think that it is a good idea to move this forward.
And Councilmember Sutton, also you mentioned, sorry for my interruption, balloons as well. You wanted us to add to that.
Yes, be silent on balloons. I just don't, I don't want them to ever have balloons on them, but putting a number seems somewhat arbitrary.
Ready? So I'll move the ordinance forward to full council with the comments that you've heard. I think generally, I think everybody up here in one form or the other would agree there's still some work you could do on this. But I also, the enforcement, just whatever the land use issues are out there, just the connection between land use violation and enforcement is so disjointed in this city that this one is just screaming to get in place to where we're not tied with our only option going to Superior Court as the nuclear option. And I think with the summer season coming, there's some need to get this on the street now and start to remedy it. What Mr. Lamone said about multiplying has been, I'm sure back when he was sitting in Garden Street, he'd get emails from me talking about a Jose Cuervo happy hour banner 50 feet long. And it's like, and as soon as the neighboring bar sees two people go in response to that, then the next guy puts one up and the next guy put. So I agree, they're just like multiplying little insects, and it's time to get to something stable that we might agree could still be worked on with all the nuances and the little details going forward. But I'd move this forward for those reasons, to get it in front of 4 more people to drag you through the details on this too, and see if we can't put something in place. So that's my motion.
Thank you. And I did have additional comment in my list there I forgot to mention, is that on page 35, for numbers 1 and 2, changing the language from saying Spanish colonial Mediterranean to El Pueblo Viejo Landmark District Design Standards specified in Chapter 30.57, which you approved was an okay change. Yes, so that's on number 1 and 2. So with those changes, I will second Councilmember Jordan's motion.
Motion moved by Committee Member Jordan, seconded by Chair Sneddon. The Ordinance Committee consider proposed amendments to Chapter 22.70 of the Municipal Code regarding sign regulations, and forward the ordinance amendments to the City Council for introduction and adoption with the changes mentioned by Councilmember Sneddon. I didn't get the last one, but I'll list the ones that were listed, which is no maximum flags on poles, flyers/papers not enforced, neighborhood associations, standardized templates, and no balloons on signage.
Thank you.
And with comments on the end of that too, so Mr. Doimus can do some more work between now and then.
And with comments.
Yeah.
Yes. For the paper, it's 8.5 by 11 sheet of
Right.
paper.
Okay. 8.5 by 11.
And then for these last comments, it's page 35, B1 and B2, to change the language referring to Spanish colonial revival / Mediterranean to read El Pueblo Viejo Landmark District Design Standards specified Chapter 30.57.
Thank you. You read it into the record, so I'll
Thank
take a
you.
vote.
And Councilmember Gutierrez has comments to the motion before we take a vote.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, I won't be supporting the motion moving it forward, just because I feel like more regulation on signs that could and will make it more difficult for our local businesses to be able to provide their services and products. I don't think it's the right time to pass something like this. But yeah, just wanted to state my opposition.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Councilmember. And
Okay, we'll go ahead and take a vote. Okay, 2-1.
If we could read them, actually, because the status on the screen doesn't match. It says waiting for vote for
Did you
Councilmember
enter your
Jordan.
vote? Councilmember Jordan?
Yeah.
Let's try one more time.
Anywhere I sit, just accept.
I know. It's you.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay, 2 in favor.
No.
1 no vote, and with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.